Hi, everyone, and welcome. We are so glad that you've decided to join us today for some learning around the author journey. And we're going to get started in a few minutes. As you're coming in today, we would love to hear from you in the chat. We'll use the chat throughout today's broadcast to be able to get your questions and interact with you. I see many folks I recognize. Hi, Nate. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Eric. Hi, Jim. Hi, John. It's great to see some friends, old and new. Hi, Jackie. We really appreciate you joining us for today's webinar. Today's a special webinar. It's an Ask Me Anything webinar about the author journey. Hi, Dana. Good to see you. I don't know about all of you, but I'm curious if you've had a difficult time getting into the week. I keep forgetting what day it is and what I have on my calendar. Um, so hopefully I'll have some fresh thoughts and creativity in response to some of the questions that you all have brought to today's event. I'm glad I'm not the only one um, who's having that struggle today. So I'm going to get started in a moment sharing my slides as we dive into the content today. We have about 30 minutes together, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm glad, Carrie. I mean, I'm not glad, Carrie, that your week has been nuts, but I'm glad that I'm not the only one. Um, so today is Ask Me Anything about the author journey. And for those of you who may not know me yet, my name is Becky Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Weaving Influence. Weaving Influence is a digital marketing agency. And I have this slide to let you know a little bit about me. I used to have some photos of my family in here until I remembered that I don't share publicly photos of my family due to my husband's job, even though I did it on so many webinars. So now I'm just showing you my friend Carrie, who's a friend I like to run with, my dog Lottie, and my daughter's cat, Philippa, just so that you can get to know a little bit of my life and the people who I spend most of my time with. You may or may not know also that I'm working on a book with Barrett Kohler Publishers. It's coming in April 2022. It's called Reach, Creating Lasting Impact for Your Book, Message, or Cause. And I'm excited to show you the cover if you haven't seen it yet. So Aubrey did have a few questions that came from some of you in advance, and then we'll take questions throughout today's event. But I wanted to start from an interesting place. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the ways that your publishing timeline, whether you're a traditional published author or a self-published author, line up to the marketing priorities that you may have. And one of the things I found in serving authors is that often it's difficult for authors to juggle those sets of priorities, because if you're traditionally publishing, you get really caught up in the process of writing. I've had some authors who have put off planning for marketing until they submit their manuscript to their publisher. And in the meantime, there's a lot of time that gets lost that could be spent preparing for launch. And so what I want to do before we dive into Q&A today is to introduce you to this new resource that I just created. Now, I recognize on this slide, my 50-year-old eyes cannot see it. If you can't see it, don't worry. We do have a PDF resource that we'll send you after the call that includes this. But I want to give you kind of a broad overview of what we've done and what the new resource includes. And and to be honest, the resource is still in development, but we're going to send it to you as it is. And when we have the final refined version, you can always get that one as well. But if you've heard me speak before about marketing or book marketing, we envision the book launch timeline to be in 4 phases. So there's the building phase. From even maybe before you dream about writing a book, you can be building up your online influence and building connections in the world. Or this building phase can start, from now, and it will go until about 6 months before you're ready to launch your book. The working phase is what kicks in as you want to be putting the foundation in place and making all the plans for your launch to market your book successfully. And I envision the working phase to begin about 6 months before your book comes out, or possibly as late as 4 months before your book comes out. And the working phase is that time leading up to launch, where you're putting everything into place for a successful launch. So I envision the launch process as being the week surrounding your publication date, but it also is the entire month. And so you want to think about the month of focused energy and attention on launching your book. And then beyond that, is what I call the advancing phase, which is everything you do to keep your book in the conversation post launching your book. And so, what we've done here is we've taken what typically happens with a traditional publishing timeline, and then also what happens on a self publishing timeline. And along the side, you can see that we've lined up the marketing priorities and how they fit. So, the entire time, if you are a traditionally published author, that you are working through the phases of dreaming about the book that you want to write, planning for the book you want to write, which includes writing your book proposal, contracting with the publisher, signing a contract with them, to the part where you actually write the first draft and do all the editing. Um, all of that is a time that you can be working on building traction to market your book. And you really only shift into the working phase of your book launch when your book goes into production with your publisher. And that production process with your publisher is typically, about 4 to 6 months. Then from there, you go into launching, which begins at the date of publication, and from there into advancing and keeping your book in the conversation. So what you might notice is that the self-publishing timeline is typically much more compressed. So you get to skip over things like writing a book proposal or dealing with a contract. And typically that process of dreaming takes you right into writing. And likely once you finish writing, you can go right into production. So the timeline on self-publishing really is a lot dependent on you as the author and how much time you take writing, but the production schedule is typically shorter when you're self-publishing. So I wanted to give that as some context for any questions that you might have brought. And I'm open to answering any questions that you have, both about the marketing side and the publishing side, or anything about my journey as well. And yes, John Stoker, we actually have the slide I'm sharing in a full PDF document that includes more about how these resources line up. And Nate, we don't have the resource on the website yet because it's actually not even finished. And I even noticed looking at that slide that we have a typo. As soon as it's on the website, we'll get the link to you and you can share it with those authors who are looking for a partner. So Aubrey, I know you brought some questions that came in before, so let's talk about them.
Sure, I have a few that were submitted in advance, and then like you mentioned earlier, if anyone has any today that they want to enter in the chat, go ahead and do that now, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. But some of the ones that came in already are, what's your creative process for coming up with the book theme, and what's been the most challenging aspect to writing your book?
Well, that's a really fun question. And so for those of you who don't know me as well, I've been thinking about writing a book nearly the entire time that I've had my business. And I've been in business now 9 years as of yesterday. And I think that, for some people, it does take a while to refine the idea, especially to refine the idea to be sharp enough for a publisher to accept. So I recorded a podcast last week with Neil Mallet, who is my editor at Barrett Kohler Publishers. And what you may or may not know is that I pitched 3 or 4 different ideas to Neil before I finally framed my book in a way that got him to say yes. So that said, I think coming up with the right creative idea really needs to align in some ways if you're writing nonfiction to the work that you're doing in the world. And whatever that work that you're doing in the world, if you can bring that together in a book, it can fuel your business as well. And so for me, as I was approaching book ideas, I really wanted to be able to figure out, what can I write that my customers or potential customers or clients, would need to read, or, what are the questions that I always find myself answering, or, what are the pain points that people who want to work with me have. And a book really is a way of scaling your thought leadership and ideas in the world. So I don't know if I have answered all the parts of that question, Aubrey. So if there's a follow-up that you need to, to clarify. But I think, really thinking about what you're passionate about. I remember having a conversation with an author, and he shared with me that someone once told him, whatever you find yourself ranting about, that's what you should write a book about. And, so one of the things that I rant about is how building influence online is something that takes time. And so I knew that when I approached writing my book, that would become an important theme. So if you find yourself saying those things again and again, to your customers or potential customers, or people ask you the same questions, those might be some of the ideas that you would want to form a book around.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think you touched on this mostly. Eric had a similar question on how do you decide if a book concept has legs, writing something that someone would want to publish and read. So I think, you'd have a
Well,
similar answer probably.
yes, but let me say a couple of more things about that. I think um, the process of building up to a book launch can help you test your ideas in the world. So, Eric, what I would typically recommend if you're thinking of writing a book is that you write something first. If you have a point of view that you want to share with the world, you can start a blog or write some articles on LinkedIn, or, if you're more inclined toward audio or video, create some videos or audio, a podcast about the topics that you're interested in writing the book about, and then see what you get a response about. Um, so it's a little bit dangerous to assume that you know what people want to read, but if you can start to test your ideas and see what gets reaction or a response, that can be a helpful way to refine your ideas prior to crafting that book proposal or prior to investing in writing the book. So I hope that helps.
Thanks. Another one we have is, what is your process for helping an unknown author gain traction in their target market?
So that's a really great question. And I'll try to dive in, Jackie, and see if I can answer it fully. You know, um, in the book, which you'll get to read eventually, I hope, what we talk about is the reach framework. And I don't have that graphic in today's slide deck. But when you want to think about building online influence, you have to start at your own website. It's the place that you own and control. So if I were working with an author who's unknown, I would first want to make sure that their website is really clear about the value that they bring to the world and the important messages that they're sharing. Because your website is the place that you own and control. From there, once you have your website established, once it's very clear in helping people to figure out the value that you offer in the world, you want to begin to collect the email addresses of the people who visit your website, get their permission to stay in touch with them in an ongoing way. And that may be something, Jackie, that has to start small. But what you want to be able to do is to provide something of value to those target audiences so that um, that people will give you permission to stay in touch and nurture a relationship with them. Now, I know if you feel like you're unknown, it might be confusing to figure out how you get people to your website in the first place. So part of what I call the basics of the reach framework are figuring out how to leverage social media, both organic social media posting and paid, in order to attract people with your ideas so they come back to your website. So those are really the fundamentals that you want to cover first to lay a foundation for being able to build online influence. And then that's when, you know, uh, the outreach really has to happen from there. But you want to first handle those fundamentals well with your website, your email list, and social. From there, partnering with others who have more influence is a great way to build your own influence. And I remember in the early days when I was first getting started, which was a long time ago, back in like 2009. Back then, a key method for getting traction was to find someone who has more influence than you and get them to feature your work. So you can do that through, writing a guest blog post or being a guest on someone else's podcast, or even by making a specific ask to someone who has a larger audience to feature your work or share about your work. So those are some key ways that I would get started to get beyond the people who know you. But I think, Jackie, also sometimes we underestimate the strength of our own networks. And it can be that the people who know us in our real life haven't really caught up to the work that we're doing online. So a step at the beginning also really is to make sure that the people who know you in the real world also know the value of the thought leadership that you're sharing online. So it may be sending a newsletter if you haven't done that in a long time to catch people up on what you're doing in your life or business. It could be, making sure that you're posting regularly and showing up on LinkedIn if that's where your network is. And I think that we overestimate how much people know and see what we're up to when we're creating content online. So I would say, repeating those messages because people aren't always going to catch it or see it the first time. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Becky.
Mm.
Jackie had another question which is related, so I'm going to skip over Vicky really quick and go to this one. But how long does it take to build influence online? This one is a good one, I feel like.
So it is a really good question, and I think that it's different for everyone. But there are a few factors that play into it, and I actually am, covering these factors in my book. Really quick though, Aubrey, did we publish the podcast yet with Karen Hurt?
No.
Okay, so we have an upcoming podcast episode that I recorded with a woman named Karen Hurt back in around 2011 when I met Karen. She was an executive at Verizon, and she was really making a transition from having had a lot of influence within a corporate organization to wanting to build thought leadership outside of that organization. And when I interviewed Karen, she said the process for her of leaving Verizon, starting her blogging journey, starting to get opportunities to speak and write and getting book contracts was really about a 4 to 5 year period. Now, for me, it took me 10 years to get the book contracts. And so I really think it's different for each individual, but the factors that play into it are there are four of them, in my opinion. The first one is value. And so to create traction online, if you can be very clear about the value that you're creating, the value that you're offering, and making that evident to your target audiences, that's where you need to start. The second thing you want to add to that is consistency. And without question, as I've been interviewing people for my book, what I hear is it's a consistency of showing up over and over again over the long haul that makes a really big difference for creating that online influence. The third factor is, let me think, longevity. And so there is this piece of, you can't show up within a few weeks or a few months and expect to magically grow a following for your new idea. It does take, being in it for the long haul. And the fourth one is generosity. And I have found that generosity is this like little talked about ingredient that really makes a difference. In terms of getting and growing your online influence. So the more generous you can be with your ideas, with promoting others and their work, the stronger connections you'll build and the greater results that you'll get as it relates to this. So those are the four factors that I outline in my book and that I've seen emerge in every conversation that I've had about building online influence. But I would say think about years, not months, in terms of getting traction, and be patient because anything worth doing takes time.
Thanks, Becky. As you were talking, I was thinking about that podcast episode you did with Dan Rockwell, which could be good to link to, but he was talking about how often he was blogging and how he showed up over many years consistently blogging. Was it daily or forget the consistency?
Well, yeah, Dan Rockwell has been blogging like every weekday since 2009 or something, and most of us are not going to be able to achieve that. And so I wouldn't even encourage anyone who's listening, I wouldn't want you to think that you have to blog every day. Now, I have another podcast episode that I also recorded that I don't think has dropped yet either with Chris Brogan. And one of the things that Chris says, which I found to be, very comforting actually, is that Chris has had a lot of different ways that he showed up with content over the years. Like, for a while he blogged a lot. For a while he did video a lot. He has a video show now that he's been doing since COVID. He's had different podcasts at different times, but what he said is it's just the consistency of showing up, period, not necessarily the consistency of that you have to do the same thing every single day. So when that podcast drops, you'll definitely want to listen to that one as well, the one with Chris Brogan. I don't even know when Karen's or Chris's are coming.
I don't know off the top of my head either, but they're in the next couple of months. And then the John Gordon one too, because he was talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I think John Gordon is more like on the lesson of longevity because John Gordon has had a newsletter in one form or another from before the advent of people using email newsletters. He had like a fax newsletter. I think he said he's been building that list since 2002. And for those who don't know who John Gordon is, he's published like 26, 28 books on leadership. He's a best-selling author and sought after speaker. And really, the longevity of he's been showing up for 20 years with the value that he has to offer. So that's where that longevity factor kicks in.
Pretty amazing. All right. So do publishers or agents typically take on an author's book that is already published?
It's a good question. I think that happens sometimes. So if you have self-published published a book that sells very well or has an idea that's unique and impactful, a publisher may consider taking the book on. In fact, my friend Nate Regier is on this call, and his book Conflict Without Casualties started out as a self-published book that he later, it was acquired by Barrett Kohler Publishers and traditionally published. So it is possible, but typically the publisher will want to know about the traction that you're getting with sales already, and they're going to base their decision to traditionally publish a book that's already been out really on the traction that you're getting with the book. Those of you who know about the book, The 1 Minute Manager, which is maybe one of the best selling business books of all time, that was originally self-published by Ken Blanchard and Spencer Tracy. And they were like using workshops to get the ideas out into the world. And then later, of course, it was acquired and, has sold many, many copies and is pretty well known and loved. So it happens. I don't know that it happens often. And I don't know about a list to query.
Thanks, Becky.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question from Dana. Dana wants to know, once written, how much time should an author plan to spend on social media during launch? And Dana says she already has an email list, but social media is exhausting.
Got it. So that's a really good question. And I get that social media can be exhausting. I think whenever I talk to authors, I really try to think about what's sustainable. And I would never advise someone to ramp up and do a lot of social for launch and then disappear. So what you want to do is really think about what can you commit to over time. What part are you willing to do yourself? What part can you outsource to others, and what part can you let go of? And so I'll use my own kind of experience as an example of that. So I am blessed to have a team who works with me. And so my team regularly posts on my LinkedIn and my Twitter. And I occasionally write my own posts on LinkedIn, when I have something that I'm especially excited to share about. My personal Facebook, I don't post on often, but when there are posts there, they are me. And then I, for the most part, run my own Instagram. It's pretty intermittent. And then my team provides some support with promoting the podcast on Instagram and occasionally promoting some client stuff on my Facebook. But at any rate, I've chosen, on purpose to outsource the majority of that social posting to someone else. I am never well, maybe I'll change my mind, but I can never imagine being on TikTok or Snapchat. I just let those go completely. I'm not going to hire someone to post for me on them. I'm not going to be on them myself. Clubhouse has gained popularity recently. I'm not interested in another channel right now. And so you have to be willing to let go of some things completely. You have to be willing to show up yourself at a certain, kind of cadence. And then if you're able to afford the opportunity to outsource to an assistant or an agency for some of your social posting, that can help you with consistency. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but for the person who asked the question, I think it's Dana, about social. I did have a podcast with Maggie Smith. She's a poet and an author, and she had some really great insights about why it's so important to build your social following before you have a book to launch. And so I would highly recommend that episode as, further learning about social.
Yeah, I love what she said in that episode, Becky. So we can link to that in the follow-up email as well.
Perfect.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, well, Jackie's asking what the episode is. And I don't know what number it is, but if you go to our website, weavinginfluence.com, and go to the blog tab, if you put in Maggie Smith's name, it should pop up in the search bar with our blog posts.
Yep. I think it's called How to Grow an Instagram Following or something like that too. So we'll link to it in the follow-up email, Jackie. Let's see. So Tony, I don't know if you'll have insight into this, Becky, but Tony was asking, thinking of writing an autobiography, is there a template available to help to format ideas?
So I'm not aware of a template offhand as it relates to crafting an autobiography, but I will tell you that there's a woman I follow on Instagram. Her name is Allie Fallon. I've never met her. I did read her memoir, and she offers, coaching groups and classes around using writing a book to tell your own personal story. So you might want to look up Allison Fallon as a resource as it relates to writing an autobiography. yeah, or, maybe Google, formatting an autobiography. What I would say though about that, Tony, is, get clear about what's unique about your own story, what you hope people will get out of it, and maybe read some other memoirs or autobiographies of similar stories. So, I mean, I love that genre personally. I love reading autobiographies. And, there's like the recovery ones, there's like the, growing up in difficult abusive situation ones, there's all sorts of different ones. So I would say start to read some that might be similar to what you're hoping to write, and see if that gives you some ideas about how to go about it.
Thanks, Becky.
Sure.
You said the G word, and my little assistant like lit up.
Oh, which word?
The Google word. She was listening, so I had to mute myself before she started talking.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious.
Let's see. Okay, so how many social media followers do I have to have for a publisher to consider publishing my book?
That's an excellent question. And it really kind of bugs the heck out of me, because I think that social media following is not a very accurate kind of set of metrics for a publisher to decide if your book is worthwhile. I think every publisher has different metrics in mind when they look at your social following. But the thing that bugs me the most is that, people can buy followers, or like, so for example, I have like 30,000 followers on Twitter. I've had them for a really long time, but I know for a fact that it is not my Twitter following that's going to sell my book. And so a publisher might look at that and, whatever, they might think it's impressive. I don't, it's not going to get me anywhere. You could go buy followers, whatever. So at any rate, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules, but my guidelines for what you want to do as you're building up, if you do want to seek traditional publishing, is to grow your following as big as possible, as fast as possible. So I've never personally put any effort around my own Instagram following, but if you're on Instagram, I would love it if you follow me. We are trying to grow my Instagram. And I have fewer than 1,000 followers on Instagram. I have about 5,000 on LinkedIn. Like I said, about 30,000 on Twitter or more. And then on Facebook, I think our company page has about 2,000. And I did get a deal with a publisher, but I think, there are different factors. And if I were a publisher, I'd be looking at email list as the most important metric. So I don't know if that is useful. I think we have time possibly for one or two more. I know that Vicky submitted a question earlier about whether a publisher would accept an agent after the publisher accepted you as an author. I don't know what the value is once you have a publisher of bringing an agent into the mix, because mainly what you have to do at that point is pay the agent. And if you got the book deal on your own without the agent, I don't know exactly what you would be paying for. I did not have an agent. I wrote a book proposal, and I took it directly to Barrett Kohler, and I did not involve an agent. I don't know a ton about agents, but Vicky, I can try to send you some resources, offline after the event, if I can be of help. I think that we're nearly out of time. I want to show you a few slides before we close today. We will get you in our follow-up email our new resource that you were looking at before, which puts in order kind of the marketing priorities against the publishing priorities. We are taking a break in July, but we will be back in August, and the topic of our August webinar is author branding. And if you registered for today, you're automatically going to get a reminder for the next one in the series. We would love it if you would listen to our podcast. We reference lots of different episodes on today's webinar that may be of help to you for further learning, so you can get more tips. You can hear other authors and their journeys and marketing advice on our podcast, the Book Marketing Action Podcast. And there's some episodes coming that could be of help to you. And we can let you know when those are ready. If at any point I can be of help to you, I've got my contact info here. You can follow me on Instagram, connect on LinkedIn, like our page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. My cell phone is here. Our three websites are here, and you can always email me at any time. Becky@weavinginfluence.com. We had way more questions today than I expected. which is amazing. So thank you so much for your interest and for joining. And I wish you great success in all your marketing and writing endeavors. Thanks, Aubrey.
Have a good one.